Second. And we are live. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day and at least coming by and considering all the things that we're going to talk about today. This is an area that I'm not particularly well versed in, but that's why I have Tom Eddlem here. He is a little bit more proficient in this area than I am, and I look forward to hearing what he has to say. He is a William Norman Grigg Fellow at the Libertarian Institute. Did I get that correct, sir?
You did, yeah.
Fantastic.
He was a good friend of mine. He passed a few years back.
Oh, my condolences. My condolences on that. That's, and hopefully, the things that that you do and many other people do, carries that memory along and continues important work. And from some of the things that I've seen just on part of your biographical section in the Libertarian Institute, you've written periodicals, I believe, for the Ron Paul Institute and a few other places. You have a couple books out as well, correct?
Yes. The one book I have on Amazon is A Rogue's Sedition. It's it's sort of a satirical play on my jury duty back in 2008. I got kicked off a jury. I'm in a mafia drug trial too, so it's kind of fun.
Oh wow.
And I have two other books that are a U.S. history and a world history that are sort of like instruction manuals or primary source document things for teachers of U.S. history, because I used to be a classroom high school history teacher.
Oh, very cool. Awesome. Yeah. History is one of my favorite things growing up and going through school. And so I think there's a definite need for good history teachers today. And one other thing that I'd like to put out there too is you graduated also from Boston College, correct?
Yes. I'm one of those guys that went back after many years. I did my undergraduate back in the 80s, and then I always wanted to go back, and I kept putting it off. I never had enough money because I was working for a Catholic school, and even though I moonlighted every summer, every weekend, every vacation as a plasterer, never had enough money to go back. But I finally said, I'm just going to do it.
Awesome.
So I got my master's from Boston College in 2021.
Awesome. Well, hey, again, really thank you very much for taking some time out of your day and coming on here. And hopefully our discussion is able to bring some new information to people and maybe even get people a little bit more involved after this podcast episode and take a little bit more of an interest in economics. I feel like it's one of those areas that tends to be overshadowed because sometimes it's not the most attractive thing, but it's very important in understanding the situation that we're in. So with that being said, I'd like to start with, and I had kind of given you an outline of where I would like to go tonight. It'd be kind of nice to get an overview of what Austrian economics is. Now, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially, the way that I understand it in very rudimentary terms is Austrian economics is an economic system that is one, it's more liberty centric. So if you're operating in this system, a company can exist within this system. It can operate in this system. You don't have even remotely the amount of overregulation. You have a lot more freedom to be able to market and sell your items. But at the same time, it also allows people to move freely as the buyers to be able to operate in that economy also. And I'm sure that there's a lot more to it that I haven't addressed. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to kind of fill in those areas. But is that kind of close, or is that a little off the mark? No,
that's good. I mean, economics is known as the dismal science, and it is dismal. But Austrians would say it's not a science.
Sure.
One of the differences between Austrian school economists and others is that we don't believe that economic theses can be proven empirically like you could with a science
Mhm.
in science. I mean, you can show correlation within a degree and whatnot, but all the other, not all, but almost all the other sciences, schools of thought within economics say, oh no, we can show that this means this by
Sure.
plugging it in using calculus. And I like doing that. I actually went back
Yeah.
to school to be able to do that, because Austrians move away from it like the plague. But
Sure.
Austrians take the view that, in an economy, a world economy of 8 billion people,
Mhm.
there are at least 8 billion different variables, not counting weather, limits to natural resources. So there's no way you can
Sure.
account for every single variable. That's basically what they're saying. That much said, the schools that do believe in what you would call empiricism, that you could
Mhm.
prove it through data, the case for them is pretty weak. But
Sure.
what differentiates Austrian school from, well, there's quite a few things that differentiates the Austrian school from other schools. But Austrians were the first to come up with, what's called it's even called the marginal revolution. One of
Mhm.
the first Austrian economists, arguably the first Austrian economist, was Karl Menger. He was in Austria-Hungary, although he lived in Poland.
Sure.
It wasn't Poland at the time. He wrote a book in 1871 called Principles of Economics, and he talked about how what's going to set the price is the last unit produced and the last unit sold in a market. And
Mhm.
pretty much every school adopted that. And now every single microeconomics class has that sort of supply and demand, the curves and the chart there. Austrians would tend to say, look, how do you get richer? You produce, right? The only way a society gets richer is labor. Whether it's with your hand or your brain. It is production, not
Sure.
demand, not anything else. If you look at some of the other schools, they're not quite as convinced at that. And
Mm.
I should say one other thing. Economics is an amoral discipline. In other words, it's not moral or immoral. It's just morality plays no role in it. An economist who says you should do this has left economics and entered ethics or morality, whichever term you prefer. Economics simply says if you do pure economics would say if you do this will likely happen. So Austrians would say, I mean, and of course that relates typically to what school people are in economics tends to fall more closely or be in alignment with what people believe ought to be done.
Mm.
So the Austrians, who tend to believe, okay, government intervention is only going to hurt things, they tend to be more individualistic. So they will be libertarians or anarchists or conservative Republicans or some sort of free market. Whereas someone who thinks that government can play a very positive role, they tend to be Keynesians or follow the modern monetary theory school or even Marxism. So there's that, and then there's gradients in between. There's hundreds of economic schools, but Austrians are popular, and it's called the Austrian school because Karl Menger was Austrian, and most of the early proponents of Austrian school doctrine, like the business cycle theory, Austrian business cycle theory, and so on, were from Austria or related to Austria. Some of the names that are, at least in economic circles, are famous would be Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich von Hayek. These and Menger. These were all Austrians. Murray Rothbard. And today, most people, if you go to like a libertarian convention, a lot of people will say, well, I'm a Misesian, I'm a Rothbardian, and they're just basically identifying with an Austrian school economist. But then the same goes with the left too. So even though economics doesn't say this ought to happen, it does say what will happen.
Sure.
Long-winded way to answer your question.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the explanation. And I it's interesting that you brought up the amoral component, because I feel like I don't know why, but I've always had this feeling like people want to interject some type of morality, and even to like, even if it's not at like a large level, but say for instance, you have a company that makes something, they're a producer, they make a lot of it, and then you have people that are like, oh, like morally this becomes ambiguous if it goes here or it goes there, and it's like, okay, but like in the end of the day, like you said, it's not really a matter of morality. It's
well that's often the case. I mean, here's the thing. One of the other precepts that the Austrians put forward is that all value is subjective. And in other words, like, well, let's take the price of gold. Right now it's $3,000 an ounce. It's gone up about 190% since 2019, and the amount of money in circulation, dollars in circulation, has gone up about 50%.
Sure.
I'm convinced it's in a bubble. But the Austrian, a pure Austrian would say, hey, that's what people want. That's the value. But I wouldn't take it. I don't know. It's sort of, I don't know, a useful fiction. I mean, and every Austrian economist listening to this will say, no, it's not a fiction, but it is in a way, because, well, one, if you have any, religious views, obviously, hey, at the end, there's an objective accounting,
sure.
At the end of days, but, even we don't really agree, because, if you listen to most of the Austrians, we like to talk about money and inflation, especially the Austrians, and we'll say, oh, the dollar isn't worth as much or whatever. We keep saying that. Well, why isn't it? Make the argument. In the old days, there were, I don't know who came up with the thing. It might have even been Adam Smith. He was sort of a classical economist in the classical school. He wasn't an Austrian, obviously. He was British, and he was before the Austrians anyway. He was 1776. He came out with shoot, it just left me. But oh man, it's killing me, because whatever. Anyway, the point I'm getting to is there are 6 qualities of money, and I'll think of this later on tonight. His book. But one of them is what makes a good money. And you think about, okay, well, it has to be uniform, right? It can't be a painting because it's worth more to someone and less to another. It has to be uniform. So, like, traditionally, people have gone with gold, right? Gold is a good. It's one piece of gold is the same as another, right? It's not. It's uniform. It has to be divisible. Well, you can make little gold coins. You can make big gold coins. It's divisible. It has to be portable. It can't be a house. You can't, go to Dunkin' Donuts and buy a coffee with your house. So, although, today you almost could with the way finance is done. But and one of the last one was traditionally it was intrinsic value. And the idea behind it was, hey, paper doesn't have this value that gold has always had value. It has intrinsic value. It's like valuable in itself. And the Austrians would say, well, wait a minute, value is subjective. So there's no such thing as intrinsic value. And that's technically true. But really it has value, right? It's almost always going to have value, unless you're in that Twilight Zone episode where the guy had all the gold and, no water and no food, at the end of the world. The funny thing is that Austrian precept has been picked up by all the other schools. When I went to Boston College, I grew up with intrinsic value as being a quality of money. And I just off the cuff, I said, even though I know the new term is acceptability, not
Sure.
intrinsic value. My professor, who's not an Austrian, corrected me and said, no, there's no such thing as intrinsic value. And, he was sort of neoclassical. He wasn't, kind of like a Milton Friedman. That was his view. But I mean, it's that is another concept that the Austrians brought into the economic world that's been broadly accepted.
Sure.
But Austrian school was pretty much a fringe group, even though Friedrich von Hayek won a Nobel Prize in economics for his work analyzing why we got into the Great Depression.
Sure.
There weren't that many. I mean, it was outside the mainstream until the 2008 crash, because all the people talking about, hey, we're headed for a crash in the real estate market because of the, and they explained it. And if you go back and look at old Ron Paul videos, if you look at Peter Schiff videos from 2000 to 2006, 7,
Sure.
they explained not only that it was coming, but why. Now, I mean, I'm both a lover and a hater of Peter Schiff. I mean, he's an Austrian school economist. He, by the way, I listened to one of his podcasts the other day, and he said he still used the term intrinsic value, which cracked me up. But when he analyzes an economic variable, he's always right. But his predictions often are wrong because he doesn't see all the variables. I don't know how to put it. I mean, he sees what's going wrong with the economy, but not necessarily all the things that are going right. So that's where he will. That's why he's sometimes called the prophet of doom, or
sure,
or something like that. But I mean, when he analyzes the issues, he's always right. I mean, he understands economics in a way that a lot of people with, lots of degrees don't.
Sure. And not to go back just a little bit, but you had brought up, 1776 and Smith, and there was a comment that came in.
Wealth of Nations.
Wealth of Nations. Yep. and like that was, and so I had to go back and I was like, okay, if you wanted to expound upon that briefly, what is your take regarding that then?
Well, The Wealth of Nations is a very difficult book to read. It's very dense. It's not,
sure.
I shouldn't even say dense, because dense implies there's a lot of content, but it's not well written. In fact, I wanted to pull an extract out for because when I was teaching high school, I also taught high school economics, introductory economics, and I wanted to pull out a short segment. And I did. I managed to pull out a page. He did a story. The one page that was readable and understandable was his explanation of really the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Because it started in Britain and then it came to the U.S. and Germany and France first.
Sure.
And he talked about making a pin, that you would sew with.
Yep.
And he said, if someone labored all day, they could make one or two in a day, a steel pin. But if you did it in a factory where you split up the jobs into 20 different ones, they could make thousands of pins in a day. And he talked about this division of labor and how it made things so much more efficient.
Yep.
And I thought, okay, my students will take that. That was the one readable part of it. And that's one of probably the most known part of it too. Of all the things that Adam Smith talked about, you probably won't find anything in the popular literature about anything other than that. There's some people that are into Adam Smith and his moral commentary and the rest of it, but that was kind of a key thing, and I liked it because it was short, a short little story that even a high school student could understand. So I used that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I actually vaguely remember my teachers growing up kind of explaining that, and at the time, I didn't really get it because I had 100 other thoughts as I'm sitting in class, but I do remember that point at least being somewhat explained, and I thought it was kind of interesting. I was a big history person, and so adjacent to history, we had economics, and I did find stuff like that interesting, but I never explored it further, and I kind of stonewalled myself. I was like my own worst enemy. And I think when we look back at, these different individuals and the ways that they looked at things and some of the things that they put forth, it can bring forth a little bit of clarity regarding so many different issues or so many different economic models. And granted, depending on the particular issue or what's going on, hindsight can always be 2020. It's like, oh, well, we should have done this differently. It's like, well, we could have, or we should have, but this is where we're at now. When we're talking about value, for instance, there is another comment that was made by Centerline, which had kind of evoked the comment of, but the value can be cheapened by shoddy material or construction. So if we're looking at something like that, I mean, is there much of a carryover for something like that, or is that, or would some people consider that also fairly subjective too?
Well, all right, here we go. tell you the one economist joke I know. Supposedly, Lyndon Johnson went into a cabinet meeting back in the 60s when he was president, and he said, "Can someone find me a one-handed economist?" And everyone said, "Well, what do you mean? What do you mean, Mr. President?" "Well, they're always saying on the one hand and then on the other hand." So, I mean, can the value be cheapened by shoddy materials? Sure. I mean, we all know that objectively, but sometimes that's all people need. So, I mean, it's one of those, my dad has this Oldsmobile, I don't know what, or maybe it's a Buick. Whatever. He doesn't have an Oldsmobile. It's a Buick. The Oldsmobile's gone. He's got a Buick, and it's SUV, and the transmission was running really choppy. And I guess there's a problem with those particular cars with the transmission. And they said, "Oh, you get it fixed for, I think they said $10,000." And he's like, "I don't know if I want that." But then my brother read online, "Oh, there's this, like, you can buy this little bottle of liquid for $12 and dump it in the transmission, and it'll stop all the knocking and pinging." And he's like, "Okay, I'll try it." And he did. And it's like, okay, is that the best way to fix it? I mean, wouldn't you rather have a new one? Yeah, absolutely. But, I don't want to pay $10,000 for a new transmission. So, I mean, he's right, but he's also, in some instances, you could argue he's wrong. It depends. My favorite saying in economics is compared to what, right? Because we always like to compare, absolutely. Especially in politics, we like to compare things to the ideal. And there is no ideal, it's sort of, okay, well, I want to get rid of all these school shootings. I want to get rid of gun violence. Okay. So we need gun control. I'm like, okay, let's look at what happens when we have gun control. What is the cost of that? Sure. Because it's not the end of gun violence. Means, it doesn't mean that there are no more guns. It just means government has all the guns. Yes. And, what we found out a couple of years ago in Venezuela is when they take away all the guns, they can have huge massacres. Yes. And, of course, it gets much worse in Nazi Germany or whatever. But, and there was a friend of mine, Aaron Zellman. He was the founder of, he's since passed. He was the founder of Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership. And he put together a book with one of his other friends, and I'm ashamed I don't remember his name because he did most of the research. But it was called Lethal Laws, and it analyzed genocide in 6 different countries in the 20th century, and every single one of them had very severe gun control restrictions. And the interesting thing is, the majority of them, the gun confiscations didn't happen under the genocidal regime. They happened under a previous benevolent regime. So just because, of course, now everybody's crying, "Oh, Donald Trump is a fascist or whatever. But, they wanted gun control 6 weeks ago when Joe Biden was president because we trust Joe Biden. But if you get rid of guns, the next guy might not be so nice. And that was the lesson that Aaron Zellman had really taught the world. The book, I wish it were still in print. It was a really good, because it analyzed the laws that had been passed. It was just a wonderful piece of scholarship. It's a rare find these days.
Yeah, it's, I actually really like where this whole conversation started off, and it's, you had brought up gold a couple times, and that kind of, it kind of brings me, and I think segues pretty nicely into, what we kind of have a picture, and I think we have a relatively decent picture of how things were economically before 1913. And then it seems like 1913 happened. We got the Federal Reserve. Then we fast forward a little bit, and, then 1933 happened. And then we fast forward a little bit more. And then I believe it was 1971, which would have been, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that was around Nixon's time.
That was Nixon.
Okay. And it's like, we just saw like this kind of this decline. And even though you had your peaks and valleys, like, it just seems like it continuously eroded. And we started devolving from something that was, I don't want to say it was economically simple prior to 1913, but it did seem like we actually had more value. We got more out of our money. It was backed by something that actually had, weight and merit behind it. And it wasn't just massively printing off paper day in and day out. And, and I think this is actually also going to help us segue into a later discussion regarding inflation and taxation. But, what's what actually happened post 1913? Because I think a lot of people talk about it and we're like, oh, the Federal Reserve, it is the thing that created all of the problems economically. But I do think that there's a little bit perhaps nuance to that situation as to like what really led up to where we are today.
Right. I mean, the history of the U.S. is one of great improvement in production and wealth. The per capita GDP in the United States rose 20% or more every decade from 1820 to 1970. Every decade, except the Civil War, because we destroyed ourselves. All right. And in some cases, it was enormous. I mean, the per capita GDP increase was 50%. I mean, it was just in a decade. And even during the Great Depression, per capita GDP in the 1930s, the Great Depression, per capita GDP increased 20%. Now, it wasn't always even or anything. But what happened is, we got the Federal Reserve Bank, a central bank, in 1913, but the Federal Reserve was still tied to gold. The dollar was exchangeable for $20.67 an ounce. So they really didn't have that much leeway to increase prices, and they did a little bit. I mean, if you look at the history of the price of American goods, they went down before the Federal Reserve. If you from 1800 to 1913, the prices went down by almost half.
Oh, wow.
Right? We're not used to that, right? We're used to, well, the prices always go up, but when you think about it, the natural flow of goods should be that prices go down because production is increasing. We're being more efficient. We have more means of producing better things. We have machinery. We have better metals. We have better tools. Yeah. So prices should be going down, and they did. But from 1913, they started creeping up, but not very fast because, again, the dollar was tied to gold. And then in 1935, Roosevelt changed it to $35 an ounce. So that was basically like a 40% inflation that, you know, was gradually eased in over the years. But it was still tied to $35 an ounce all the way up until 1971. And after 1971, the floodgates went off. Well, what happened? Well, if you look at the history of you know, I'm a working guy as well as an economist.
Sure.
If you look at the average person, I mean, I shouldn't say average, median person, all right? Because there's a sort of little sleight of hand trick that a lot of people, even some so-called libertarians, play with, like, oh, the average has gone up. Well, difference between the average and the median is this. Let's say you have 10 people in an economy, all right? And they all make $1,000 a year. And then next year, one guy makes $1 million. Well, now all of a sudden the average is over 100,000, but the other 9 out of 10 are still making 1,000. Okay. The median is still the 50th percentile is still 1,000, but you got $1 million. Okay. So, but the median income during the post-war period and before that too, increased very dramatically. It went up between 1946 and 71. The average, the median income increased 50% after accounting for inflation. Okay.
Sure.
Since then, it has increased 20%, I think. And that's 50 something, 54 years, so it's, and and the same thing with per capita GDP, by the way, from I don't remember when did I measure it? 1820 to 1970, per capita GDP never increased less than 20% in a decade, except the Civil War. Since 1970, it has never attained to that level again. It is always, per capita GDP has always grown less than 20%, per person. So, well, why is that? Well, inflation, and also the median income has suffered. Well, now if you listen to the Democrats, it's like, oh, it's those billionaires that are, Bernie Sanders, those are the billionaires, the millionaires and the billionaires. Wait, I'm a millionaire. It's a billionaires. And, and we got Elon Musk has too much money. And I'm thinking, dude, you made him a billionaire, right? Obama's American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 had a $7,500 per electric vehicle subsidy up to 200,000 units. And by 2021, Musk had sold all of those, and he had gotten the 1.5 billion that Bernie Sanders had voted for. I mean, if you look at why is Elon Musk so rich? He's rich because he's a very efficient tax farmer. That's really what he is. To his credit, he doesn't lobby for more subsidies, but he's really good at getting them. And you know who votes for them? The Democrats. The Democrats who are complaining Elon Musk is too rich. All right. So, Elon Musk might be Hitler, but he's the Democrats' Hitler.
Sure.
I mean, that's really, they can't disown it, because if you look at his contracts, he's got contracts with NASA. Well, you think it's the Republicans that say, oh, we can't get rid of NASA. Look at all the great things that JFK did. He took us to the moon and blah, blah, blah. It's not the Republicans doing that. Well, maybe it is now with Bobby Kennedy in the HHS, but it wasn't before. They were voting against NASA. Oh, we don't need this anymore. The moon trip was a waste. It was the Democrats voting for that. The Democrats are voting for all these, electronic subsidies and carbon tax credits, which Elon Musk makes hundreds of millions of dollars worth each year. Elon Musk's Tesla itself was saved by one of those Obama era green energy loans. He was loaned over $400 million. This, it's interesting. I think it was this week, the Washington Post came out with a story that said Elon Musk had gotten, I forget what it was, something like $34 billion in loans and contracts with the federal government. But they didn't talk at all about who voted for them. And it was all the Democrats. I mean, none of the Republicans voted for Obama's American Recovery and Reinvestment Act back in 2009. They all said, well, we can't afford it. Why do we want to give environmental subsidies out? it was all the Democrats, and they continue to just vote for them. And they vote for the Democrats have become the new militarists too. They want big military spending and the wars. Bernie Sanders used to be anti-war, but he's not anymore, at least not since 2016. And that's when, it's only been since 2016 that Elon Musk created SpaceX. I mean, I think that was about when he, it might have been a little bit before that, but Bernie Sanders made sure there were all kinds of subsidies waiting for him when he did set it up. Let's put it that way, and I don't know. It's just, it's frustrating, but at the same time, I like to look back and say, ha, 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 you created your own monster. Because that's what they're mad at. I mean, Elon Musk is supposed to be a loyal Democrat. I mean, we funded him, that he was the darling of the left, but no, not so,
And, when you look at how the Democrats have conducted themselves, I would say even for if we just go back for 2 decades, I mean, they really do, they are kind of their own worst enemy, because they say one thing and then, they're like, oh, this is going to be fantastic. It's going to work out great. And then all of a sudden, a couple of years later, they're like, oh my gosh, the whole house is on fire. We have to try and salvage this. And when you're bringing up the subsidies and all of that, I mean, oh yeah, they are the first people out on the street just clamoring for more of it, almost regardless of what it is the subsidy goes to. And then all of a sudden, you have this situation to where, as I like to say, how the turns have tabled, just to throw on, a humor aspect of it. It's, then they don't like it because they're like, oh, well, we didn't intend for it to be this way. It's like, but are you sure about that? I do think that there are some people that I think they're really good at acting surprised, but then I do think you have some people that genuinely were led to believe oh, this isn't actually how it was supposed to be. So when you look at Elon Musk, and then, they have all of the support going into these subsidies like you were talking about, and then they act just shocked and surprised when all of a sudden, he's benefiting and it is kind of ironic in a way. But it's humorous.
It is. I mean, listening to the Democrats talk about their principles is like going into Monty Python's cheese shop and ordering cheese. I mean, these guys, how do I put it? I mean, they just don't get it. Donald Trump at least offered working people a tiny tax cut. I'll give you $500 or $1,000 or whatever. Sure, he gave, he cut the rich people's taxes more, but he gave them something. And in 2024, what did the Democrats offer the working people? They said, well, we'll let you have all the pronouns you want. And working people basically said, can I eat my we them? Can my we them pay my mortgage? Right. And then they're like, no. It's like, well, then I don't want you. I mean, it should not be a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise. They offered them literally nothing.
Yeah. And it's, and I do remember when I was reading the article that you had sent me regarding plutocracy, and, and you had even mentioned that more of the, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but it was something akin to almost like the establishment, quote unquote, libertarians that are in Washington, and how they kind of do the same thing. They don't really actually throw a crumb out there. It's like it amounts to be the same as what the Democrats do. And then that's why also when you had Trump that came around and he was talking about all these things and these tax cuts and all of that, yes, naturally people are going to gravitate to that, like you said, because, there is a legitimate belief okay, we are going to get some relief here. It may not be much, but it's a heck of a lot more than what these people over here are offering. And so I think that's a great point. And I'm going to put your article down below in the comments or in the description, because I would really encourage people to read it, because you make a lot of fantastic points there. And I think, when you had talked about, I believe, what was it? Mises. I think you had mentioned it may have been Mises, if I remember correctly, in Washington.
Well,
I
no,
feel
Mises
like
not
that,
in Washington. Cato, and
or
I was
Cato, I'm sorry.
I was
Yep.
pretty rough on the
Yep.
Cato Institute, and
Yep.
they kind of
That,
deserve it. Yeah,
that's what it was.
yeah.
And
They come out with a tax proposal every year, and
that's, yeah.
it's just basically, like, to sum it up, it's like the poors aren't taxed enough. I mean,
Yes. Yes.
this is the way it's always sold. It's sort of, hey, look at this one little piece of paper. Like, they
Yeah.
say, oh, well, did you know that half of Americans don't pay income taxes?
Sure.
And that 90% of the income tax is paid by the top, whatever. I mean, okay, but that's only that's 60% of federal revenue. But what's 35%? It's payroll taxes, right? The FICA taxes. I mean, if you're a working person, hey, 15.3% of what I earn is going right to the federal government from $1.
Sure.
There's no deduction, right?
Yep.
I mean, at least with income taxes, you can deduct.
Yeah.
And and you add in inflation, which is wage theft. Inflation is wage theft. And I want to talk about that. But, add in inflation, that's 3% to up to 8% as it was in 2022.
Yeah.
Plus whatever they pay in income taxes. I mean, even if you don't pay much, you're still paying more than Warren Buffett's paying with his investments. He's because the capital gains tax tops out at 20%, and you don't pay income tax on that. So when the Democrats say, the rich are paying double the rate of the average worker, that's true. That is true. Okay. There's no arguing that. But the think tanks in Washington, which are almost exclusively funded by billionaires, don't want you to know that. They don't want the average person thinking, hey, why are you paying, double the dollar on the first dollar you make compared to compared to an investor? And it's because they like it that way. I mean, if I said the median income only increased 20% since 1971, but guess what? The rich got a lot richer, and that's okay. Yeah. I mean, and some of that is global trade, right? If you were to, I mean, you have to expect more billionaires, because when you go from a protectionist system, which we had, back in the 30s, where you basically only sell to America and you sell a few goods abroad. If you make $1 profit on selling to 1 out of every 3 Americans, well, you got $100 million, right? But if you have this where the tariffs come down and you sell to 1/3 of 8 billion people on Earth and you make a $1 profit, well, you're a multi-billionaire.
Yeah.
Right. We may be going back to that with Trump, but but just that old system. But I mean, I don't have a problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is double taxing labor. That's a problem. And the worst tax is not the payroll tax. That's very regressive too. But the worst tax is in inflation. I want to take a minute to talk about that when you get a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for correcting that, because I could see the logo, and I was reading something else earlier today, and it was pertaining to Mises, and I'm like, no, that doesn't sound right. And then I'm like, no. And then you brought up Cato, and I was like, that's exactly what he was eviscerating. And
I love the Mises Institute. I've never written for them. I've written for LouRockwell.com, but not the Mises Institute. At least not yet. Not yet. It's on my bucket list, though.
I actually have no doubt. I'm sure you're going to get there, because in my opinion, you're a smart guy. You know a lot. You know a lot more, way more than I do. And
I'm just older. By the way, I'm switching to whiskey. I'm from coffee, so there we go.
But you may have a couple fans in the comments section. I'm here to tell you right now. You may have a couple fans on that. When I do remember growing up, hearing about the Cato Institute, and especially in school, they had like all of these different, they had all these different subsets and different organizations, and it seems like so much of the reference material did come from Cato, and even if it was something that wasn't directly related to the books or that we had in school or anything like that, but it did seem like even something that, was pretty accepted. And then now to, having looked at your article and read your article and even listened to the conversation that you had with Scott Horton, it does make a lot more sense of like, yeah, like I actually don't remember a time, at least that I've been around, and I'm only 32, but it's like I don't actually remember a time to where it's like, yeah, we got anything really meaningful in terms of legitimate cuts from Cato. Like it seems like it's the same. It's been kind of that same train to where it's just like, hey, like we're definitely gonna do this, and then lo and behold, it comes time for that to come around, and there's just nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that about anyone, right? Though, I mean,
100%.
we haven't had, in Cato's
Yeah.
Institute, in the Cato Institute's case,
Yep.
I come down hard on them, mostly because, the proposal was largely bad. Not everything in it was bad, but and they do some good work. I mean, especially
Yep.
Doug Bando, and he does some great anti-war reporting with Cato. And they've for a long time had Ted Galen Carpenter, who's now over at our Libertarian Institute.
Sure.
So I mean, I don't mean to disparage everything that they do, but they are funded by billionaires, and you can tell they go to their clientele.
Right.
And hey, I would like to be wealthy, but I'm not in that.
Oh. Let's see. I think you might be a little muted there, Tom. One moment, everybody. Minor technical difficulties. Just to provide a little bit of filler, it is kind of interesting how you look at that, and there is a really good point, that it really does apply to everybody in terms of really just falling short or just not living up to, the things that they say they're going to do. And I would argue that one of the really good examples of this, and I know to some people, they're going to feel kind of picked on, but the Republicans are notorious for a lot of the different things that they say that they're going to do. He'll be right back. He's going to have to log back in, which is all right. But the Republicans are notorious for things that they say that they're going to do. And then it's like, oh yeah, well, it's not, we're not going to get around to, we're not going to do that, or we'll just kick the can down the road, or we'll do something, different next time, or, we'll wait till the next cycle. And it just seems like to be this pervasive thing. So, I mean, he's not wrong when it's not just the Cato Institute. And like he said, there are certain things that I think that they do well, but there does seem to be this prevalent situation to where, like, Tom was saying, it's there is some semblance of being able to cater to the people that donate you money. And I think you see this all over the spectrum. And, the Democrats and Republicans are certainly not the least of this situation. So it's, I'm going to go through a couple comments here while we're waiting for things to get figured out. Learn Me Something says, cheers. Centerline System says he just needs a beard. Well, I mean, there's still some time. There's still some time. And it looks like, I think, so it looks like they're almost back. Looks like Tom's almost going to be back. It'll just be a couple more seconds here. He needs a mustache to twirl in order to fix his sound. So that there is a little backstory to that, and I'm going to share a little backstory. I was recently a couple of weeks ago on a adjacent podcast by the wonderful Centerline Systems. If you haven't checked out that podcast, highly recommend you pop over to Centerline Systems on YouTube, Rumble, and over by Twitter, because there's some pretty good stuff there. But there was a situation over there to where Learn Me Something in the comments happened to have some technical difficulties of his own. And sure as heck, as soon as he, started to mess with the fantastic mustache, it became a thing to where it's like all of a sudden everything just cleared up. And I have no idea why that's the case. So, all right. It looks like I might be able to bring him back. So let's see. He's buffering here. I think we got you back. Yeah. Let's see here. 1 second. Oh. And I was just telling Tom, sounds good, Tom. Like I was just telling him in the very beginning, technology, it's one of those things to where when it works great, it's amazing. When it decides that it doesn't want to work great, it kind of sucks. It's kind of a pain. So he's working on rectifying some issues, but he absolutely he's made a lot of really great points, and I'm super happy that we're able to have him tonight. And there's several other issues and things. I know he really had some points and conversations that he would like to have, and I hope we're going to be able to get around to that. Hopefully we can get these technical issues out of the way. So Gene from across the pond. Okay. All right. This is too funny. Yeah, that's pretty much what it amounted to. It just adjusting the antennas. Yeah, I mean, that's the best way to explain it. Gene, also fantastic. Fantastic having you here for a little bit of comedic relief, sir. Comedic relief. And the boys in the chat, really good-spirited folk. So hopefully we'll be able to get this back here in just a minute. Like I said, technology is fantastic when it's not, or when it works, and it sucks when it's not fantastic. So there are a couple things that we are going to move towards, I think, and this is where I think the conversation is going to go. But he is going to start getting into a little bit more about the different forms of taxation. Inflation is something that he definitely wants to talk about. And I kind of want to get further into the impact for the individual and businesses, because I think that there is definitely something to be had in terms of a conversation there. So let's see. All right. Oh, I hear audio. I definitely
know. Just went with a different mic.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Oh, I'm glad you're back, sir. Glad you are back. So I was just kind of explaining where I think the natural segue was starting to go. And I know that there was, you really wanted to have a conversation, if I remember correctly, about the inflation and all the things that are surrounding inflation. And I think even further on like the taxation, but also I'd like to really also get down to like more into the individual and like how it even affects small business owners, because we have people that watch the show and they are coming from a small business disposition. And I know that some of these guys, they're feeling the crunch really bad right now. And, I think it's bad when you're an individual that works for somebody, but I think to some degree, it really sucks a little bit more when you're a business owner, a small business owner. So if you'd like to take it in whatever direction you please, sir.
Okay. Let's start with, what does inflation, let me see. When inflation is created, right, inflation is the creation of new money. According to the popular perception, it's the increase in prices, but that's not always true. It could be just a low increase in the amount of money. Think about it from the perspective of, even on the gold standard, we have an increase in the amount of gold in circulation. During the 1850s, we had the California gold rush, and prices went up a little bit when all of that gold was mined. But when new money is created, the first people to get it are the ones who benefit best from it. Are you hearing me all right?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So if you're creating paper currency like the Federal Reserve does, then you're dealing with the people who get it first, are the government, and then the financial industry, and then government contractors, and maybe small businessmen next. And then last would be the laborer. This was actually explained by a French economist named Richard Cantillon. He was of Irish descent. And he talked about how the people who benefit are the ones who get the money first, and the people who are hurt the most are the ones who get the money last. And that's always the laborer.
Yep.
And the reason for that is simply this: the laborer is always a net creditor in society.
Sure.
Very few laborers get paid for their labor in advance, right? You say, oh, you work your week and then you get your pay. Sometimes you work in a couple weeks. The worker is, and you're dealing with 40% of GDP too. So it's a huge credit on the economy. And then you add into that, if you're really poor, you rent your house and the landlord says, okay, first, last, and security deposit. You're crediting your landlord with your rent before you live in the house. So, this is, the creditor is the one who's hurt by inflation, and the debtor is the one who is helped by inflation.
Sure.
And as you might think, oh, well, poor people, they're the ones with lots of debt, and they're going to be helped by this. But that's not true. You need credit in order to have debt. I mean, except for the student loan crisis. You find that most of the people who are in debt are the rich people. I mean, the richer you are, the more debt you have. In fact, if you're a real estate developer, one of your goals is to keep 80% equity in loans, because you want to buy a new property and rent them out. And, so what you find is, if someone is a billionaire, he has $1 billion on net, he probably has $4 billion in debt. And if his equity goes beyond 20%, he pulls it out and buys a new property. And it benefits him, because inflation is basically a slow motion way to repudiate debt. On the Scott Horton show, I told this story about my Venezuelan friend who he bought a house.
I remember that.
Before he moved out of Venezuela, he bought a house, saved up his money, and in a couple of years, because Venezuela had hyperinflation, his, what was the equivalent of $25,000 in mortgage debt had gone down to $120 just in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so he paid off his house with less than a day's wages.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens in the United States a little slower. I remember when I first moved out of my house, after I graduated from college, I went out to Wisconsin, and came back and I said to my dad, "Oh, I got this a great apartment. It's right across the river from Lawrence University. It's only $290 a month." And my dad, the old man, looked at me and he went white, and he said, "That's more than my mortgage."
Yeah.
And he has a nice house in the Boston area. It's probably worth $1 million now.
Sure.
But it's a 4-bedroom colonial. It's Boston. But the inflation had helped pay off his mortgage over the 1970s and 80s.
Yeah. No, it was interesting listening to that story that you told on Scott Horton. The whole segment, like, again, I would also encourage people even just to go back and watch that episode too, because it was a fantastic episode. Thanks. And I do think that a lot of people have some relatively, I think, honest misconceptions about inflation, how inflation works, and the whole apparatus therein. And so when we look at it, it is kind of interesting. And I did find, and even during your explanation here, I do find it pretty interesting, because I never used to think about it that way. I kind of had just a general idea of like, oh, well, inflation is just, like, it's just something that happens. I didn't really know where it came from or what happened or how it was created. And then, as time went on, I kind of was like, oh, all right, well, there's this situation also to where, like, it's I used to kind of go with, it's related to value. And then if you print a lot more money, then you start to, you lose value. But then it's like you create this issue. But then it's like if you print less money and you allow that money to circulate, then it kind of alleviates the issue. And so I only, over the last several years, I kind of went through this this growing portion to where I'm slowly starting to get an idea of how the inflation works. But it's amazing that even back in school, they really didn't provide a very good understanding of inflation. And I think a lot of that is also in just the general educational doctrine. I don't think they do a very good job at teaching even something as basic as arithmetic nowadays. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was about to say, with inflation, a lot of people like to think, oh, well, why would the banks want it? They have so much money.
Right.
Aren't they the creditors? I go to the bank and I get a loan. But to be in banking is to be in the business of being in debt. When you think about it, okay, they owe, usually the depositors, those are the ones being cheated, right? Usually that's working people that put their money in the checking account and they lose their money through inflation. But the bankers don't care about that. They care about, okay, we're going to give 1% to the checking account holders, and we're going to charge 5 or 6% to the others. So bankers don't care about inflation. I mean, one of my favorite sayings is no amount of inflation ever sunk a yacht. Because it doesn't destroy wealth directly that way.
Sure. Yeah.
If prices are staying the same, you still have inflation, because prices should be going down because of better production and more efficiency. So even stable prices are really inflation, at least from the Austrian perspective.
Sure. Yeah. And it's, and I listen to a variety of podcasts myself. And, I always, whether it's like Ron Paul's podcast, The Liberty Report, or whether it's on Judge Napolitano or Dave Smith or whomever it is, all of them are like, hey, like, gold is a fantastic hedge against inflation. It's not perfect, but it will give you some level of security. And I think that's something that I was, to some degree, kind of introduced to slowly but surely over the years. And I just, I think it was in re-listening to I think it was re-listening to you on Scott Horton um, about gold and silver, and how gold is becoming more widely accepted just in general around the world as opposed to silver. And so is that something you'd like to speak on in terms of inflation and further expanding upon gold?
Yeah, sure. I mean, gold has been used for money for what, 5,000 years?
Yeah,
It's a store of value.
sure.
It's held its value. It's held its value in the 20th and 21st centuries, and even increased in purchasing power,
Yep.
about 0.5% to 1% a year. It's not, in my view, a great investment, because of half a percent to 1% per year, is not that great. Whereas, if you put your money in like an S&P 500, if you put $1,000 into the S&P in 1929 before the crash, and you left it in there, you'd have over $6 million today.
Wow.
Now you lost 70% of that in the first few years, but it all came back and then it increased. Now a lot of that's inflation, but that's still over $350,000 today. So you can pull 7% out of a stock index fund forever and never lose your principal. You stay about the same. You can't do that with gold.
Okay.
And silver, because it's a more common element than gold, it doesn't hold its value in the same way. It hasn't really even kept up with the CPI. Gold, let me think. I forget. I think the dollar has lost 97% of its value.
Oh, wow.
Since 1913, in purchasing power.
Yeah.
So that's a 33 times increase. But if you look at a gold dollar, which was, it's not worth $33. It's worth, it might be close to 30 now, because it's not a full ounce.
Sure.
And if you look at the spot price right now, it's up in the 30s, but it hasn't quite kept pace. That's why there were huge debates at the end of the 19th century about free silver. They wanted a little bit of inflation, and if you coin lots and lots of silver, the prices will ease up and increase.
Okay.
And when they did, it increased a little.
Sure. So I know that you've talked a fair bit about taxes, even in the duration of this episode. And I think taxes are something that a lot of people are concerned with on a daily basis, not just as it pertains to inflation, but also when we look at, how many taxes that actually exist. And I think we could make an argument that a lot of them just kind of exist by somebody wrote they ended up writing something down and they're like, no, this seems like a really good idea. Albeit it was a horrible idea. But I think some of the taxes that a lot of people are concerned about, especially is like property taxes. And I know that there's a pretty big discussion around property taxes, at least with the people that I've talked with, and how property taxes really affect just the realm of liberty, not only as an individual, but societally, because at that point, it's like it takes away the actual ownership of the individual from like your home or your business or whatever the case might be. And it kind of brings in this we become renters, type of situation, to where we don't actually own it. We're paying for the ability to use it or the ability to live there. And so when it comes to things like property taxes and other forms of taxation, and I know you had already hit on like payroll tax and all of that, is that something that you're willing to or you would like to expound upon a little bit?
It's it's a school. I don't know if I want to say it's economics, but there's a school of people called Georgists who say all the taxes should be property taxes, no other tax. All tax should be on land.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've written about. I'm going to change the subject here to tariffs. I've written about tariffs, and our founding fathers liked them for the federal tax.
Sure.
Because it was the least intrusive. Now, there were two schools of the thought on that. The first was Alexander Hamilton, who was a protectionist. He wanted to keep out everything. The other was Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson basically said, look, we need tariffs to raise the money we need for government, but we need to keep the taxes low. And that's all we need. We don't need protectionism. And that worked great. From 1801 until the Civil War, the only tax the federal government levied was the tariff, and it worked great. They had to keep cutting the tariff because they had too much money. And during the Civil War came, and they added a bunch of stuff. And then after the Civil War, they went mostly back to that, but they wanted protectionist tariffs, which cut down on the revenue. So they also had a tax on alcohol and tobacco. And that was what they did up until World War I. And then by World War I, they had the income tax and everything else. Actually, during the Spanish-American War, they levied a temporary tax to pay for the war, a $2 tax on telephones, which was not abolished until 2009. 100 years, 110 years, almost 110 years. So it's a temporary.
I never even knew about that. That's actually really interesting.
Yeah. So can you hear me? Because my headphones just okay.
Yep.
I'm going from microphone to mic. I'm having technology issues today, but I want to start my own podcast, but I don't want to do the tech issues. I want to figure it out. I used to do radio a lot. When I do my podcast, it'll be called the Blue Collar Economist podcast.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Because my view is I'm a libertarian. I don't want welfare. I don't want any of that. But I believe in what's called the preferential option for the poor. I think that we should do what we can to make things a little easier for people who are struggling. If as a libertarian, I'd like to get rid of all taxes, but if we're going to get rid of only some, let's make it easier for the people on the margins. That means lower payroll taxes, get rid of the inflation tax. Those are the two most regressive taxes. And then, income tax and all the rest of it, the capital gains, all of it.
So I have two things for you. One of them is a comment, so I'll bring that up first. Learn me something. Was wondering what your opinion is on fiat currency versus commodity secured currency.
Oh, well, I think commodity secured currency is vastly superior. I mean, there's traditionally economists say there's three kinds of currency. There's fiat, there's commodity currency, and then there's what they call representative currency. So, during the post-Jackson era in the United States, we had commodity currency. We coined gold and silver. There were no paper dollars. And then after the Civil War, we had a representative currency where we had gold coins and silver coins, but we also had paper, and they could be exchanged anytime for the gold and silver, depending on when in time you're talking about.
Sure.
And I prefer that to the fiat because it's much more limiting and it's much more restrictive as far as inflation goes. You simply can't have massive inflation unless they discover this, the largest gold hoard that's ever been discovered. You're not going to have hyperinflation in gold. And the same thing with silver. I mean, silver is mildly inflationary, but it's not on the same scale.
Sure.
So that, I think it's vastly preferable.
Mm. Yeah, I guess knowing what little I do about fiat currency, it just perhaps I have a bias, but it really is the suboptimal option in terms of the currencies that should exist or that do exist. Anything that I think you have like a sense of security with, I think is always going to be. I think it's going to be preferable, right? Because
Right.
when we look at the realm of fiat, not even just contemporarily, but historically, because from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but we are not the only country that's entertained fiat currency, and it seems to be something that really just. I feel like we just have gone down a road to ruin. It just has not worked, and it's. I think it's not just us, but if you look, I think on a global scale, even there's countries that are kind of feeling the same thing we are, and when you expand that to a global realm, I think it kind of gets even worse, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, fiat just simply means demand, right? I mean, you have
Hmm.
to, the fiat is you must use the currency. Um, you know, Peter Schiff likes to say that Bitcoin is a fiat currency without the fiat, and technically he's right. I mean, there may be a big future in Bitcoin, but there's no fiat behind it. I mean, one of
Sure.
the, I don't need Bitcoin, but I tell you, I need dollars because I want to stay out of jail. I mean, that's really what's
Yeah.
propping up the dollar, right? That we all have to pay them every April 15th. That's the main prop. A lot of people were saying, oh, when the petrodollar dies, the dollar is going to go in the toilet, or the dollars.
Yeah.
A lot of Austrians like to say, oh, the dollar isn't worth anything. I'm like, yeah, it's worth a lot because it keeps us out of jail. I mean, that's
Right.
that's what it comes down to. Okay,
Sure.
and yeah, as long as they keep printing more of them, it's going to be worth less. And to the extent that they print more of them, it'll be worth a lot less. If they print not much more, then it'll stay pretty close to the same.
Sure.
That's the interesting thing. Like a lot of people think, oh, um, they say inflation is in Austrian view, inflation is an increase in the amount of currency. But if you think about it, even technically, even gold is inflationary because if you discover more gold, you're going to increase the currency. So
Right.
so why does the price of gold constantly go up? It's because production has gone up faster than the discovery of gold. That's really what it is. And why does the price of silver not quite go up as fast as prices? Well, silver is more common and there's more production of silver. That's what it comes down to. But as far as the fiat goes, yeah, we all need them to stay out of jail. So you could argue that a tax cut might be inflationary.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not saying it is, but I mean,
Yeah.
we would need less of them, right? I mean,
sure.
we would still probably work with them, but
Yeah.
but that's the main value right now in having those pieces of paper known as dollars, or the electronic keys to call dollars.
Right. And I know you had touched on tariffs a little bit, and I guess for me, there's, especially in recent time, there's a lot of talks on tariffs, and it's still one of those areas that I'm not super familiar with. I know a little bit, but what do you think are like some of the biggest misconceptions that people have with tariffs and their impact on the economy? And because I hear a lot of people, they say, well, placing the tariffs, it's either not going to overwhelmingly adversely affect us, or if it does, like it's worth it, and we'll just we'll weather the storm. And I feel like that's all that most people get out of it, but I can't help but to feel like there's still more surrounding tariffs that a lot of people don't see. And so when it does pop up, there's almost this surprise. And it's like, okay, well, like this was always there as it pertains to a tariff, but you kind of just simplify it as to what you thought it might be. So, I mean, what do you think is the biggest misconception of tariffs and their impact on the economy?
Well, with Republicans, I think the misconception is that it'll help us strengthen our domestic economy, that people will be better off, and that's not true. I mean, it's a tax. It's just a tax on imports, and it can be very disruptive to the global supply chain, especially if everybody starts retaliating. Theoretically, you threaten to levy a tariff, and the other guy takes theirs down, and then you don't do it. That's okay. That's a net positive. But if you have to actually enact them, then people are going to pay more for some of the goods, at least in some instances. I think with the Democrats, for the most part, the misconception is this: they say, "Oh, well, if we put a 25% tariff on imported oil from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, then oil prices are going to go up 25%." Well, no, they're not. I mean, they may go up a little bit temporarily, but the U.S. is a net oil exporter anyway, so they will just reroute the supply chain, and prices probably won't change much, and it won't. Not only that, it won't make any revenue because we'll just shut out all the exports. I mean, that's the interesting thing. Some tariffs will just 1 or 2% will shut out all the imports, and others theoretically could take 100%, 200%, and people would still buy it. I like to think of something like a Lamborghini, right? I mean, a person who buys a Lamborghini, they want a Lamborghini and they're willing to pay for it. And, hey, if it's twice as much, that's all the more, that's great. But if you're buying a Honda or a Suzuki, then you're going to buy a Ford instead.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's a really good way of explaining it. And it's especially as it pertains to the Republicans and the Democrats, because I do think that those are two of the most pervasive viewpoints. It's like you have one side that's just overwhelmingly terrified and the other side that's just like, oh, this is going to be the game changer. And not to get like, not to get into foreign policy, but where have we seen this game changer mentality? Like, oh, if we just send them one new weapon system, it's going to just fix everything. All of these problems just start to go away. And, and I think, I don't know, maybe that's just the way that they've kind of just evolved into is you have the Democrats that perpetually worry about everything, and you have the Republicans that think that, something like a tariff or a brand new weapon system is just going to be the Band-Aid that fixes, like a horribly hemorrhaging wound. Like, it's just, that's not how that works. And there's
and in 4 years when the offices switch and the Democrats are in charge, they'll have the opposite view.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much how it works, right? Because the television will tell them the opposite. The television will say, President Gavin Newsom just levied a tariff, and all the Democrats will say, "Oh, this is going to help our economy. It's great. They're going to bring down tariffs abroad." And all the Republicans are going to say, he's just increasing taxes on us, and it's going to disrupt. It'll be the exact opposite. I mean, that's the way it works, right?
Yeah, just almost like this. Not almost. It pretty much is just this fabricated hysteria. I mean, and they're really, really good at that. They like to whip people up in just this ball of chaos, and I think it's like. I do think there's like a purpose behind that, just to keep that chaos so that people don't really know like what's going on sometimes. And that might be rabbit holing a little bit, but I think especially in terms of the economy, I mean, if people don't stop and actually ascertain a good gauge of where things are at, I mean, are you really going to, are you really going to be that concerned? Are you really going to be that worried? Or are you going to be like, well, this is all just too confusing and I'd rather just not be involved in it at all? And I think that's the same for many different pressing issues, especially as it pertains to liberty in each person's individual life. If you make it too complicated and too difficult, people aren't going to want to be involved in trying to fix it, is what I found.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, politicians, there aren't many I liked. I mean, I liked Ron Paul and Justin Amash, Thomas Massey. And that's about it. I mean, other than that, I have to go back, to the 19th century. I mean, there was an Irish guy from New York that was pretty good, William
Sure.
Bork Cochran. But there's not too many. There weren't too many good congressmen. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
They just bend with the wind, except for those handful. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like very few and far between. And, anytime we do get somebody like that, you're just like, man, I hope there's some longevity here, because they really are kind of that lighthouse in the middle of a stormy sea. And, as we're moving along in this discussion, we're kind of coming to the back end of our discussion. And there's something that has always been interesting to me. And this is kind of like a conversation that I've had with people as it pertains to the economy. And you hear a lot of people say, oh, especially if we look at Europe, oh, Europe is going to a war economy now, because that's how they're going to salvage, their broken economy. And I just saw a publication today of how Germany's like, we need to build more tanks than we do cars, because this is going to be the thing to revitalize us. And I can't help but to think that, I feel like the United States.
Germany going to more Panzer production doesn't sound very reassuring to me. But
right. Where have we seen
especially
this
where
before?
they're rolling eastward into Ukraine, right now.
Where have we seen all this before? I feel like we've seen a version of this a while back, and it didn't even end well for them back then. But
No.
But it's I in my conversations with friends of mine, and some of whom are on here watching the episode right now, it's like we've seen this trend to where it's like even the United States is like, oh, like the economy's getting bad, so we better like go start some trouble somewhere else and ramp up that wartime economy to try and salvage the mess that we have. And it's like, I guess my question is like, how damaging is that? Because you might have like a really good peak at a certain point in time, but eventually, I shouldn't say eventually, who knows, but typically you do start to head towards that valley to where the war is like either coming to an end, or it's starting to get to a point of, as with the United States, a point of disinterest. So it's not that we end the war, we just like leave out the back door like a bad party, right? We're not interested in this anymore. So what are your thoughts on that? Because it seems like a pretty pervasive conversation, at least that I've come across in probably the last, 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, war and war production don't help the economy.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this. There's a very short essay put out by this French politician, Frederick Bastiat, back in the 1840s, 50s. It was called That Which is Seen and That Which is Unseen. And he uses two examples. One is a broken window, and the other example is a bunch of soldiers sitting in a barracks. You're paying soldiers to protect your country. And, I'll use the soldier. Well, I'll tell both stories. I used to have my economics students read it because it's easy to understand. It's very short. Sure. It's maybe 5 pages, on my 8.5 by 11 printout that I had to
right.
And basically, what's the value of that? Well, I mean, all of these, the argument for it is economically is, oh, well, all of these soldiers are, they're getting salaries and they're going to go spend it in the, in the town, they're going to get food, they're going to, buy whatever, and that'll increase the town's economy. And, isn't that wonderful? It helps the economy. But when you think about it, those soldiers, if they're actually defending the country, then they're doing something valuable. But if they're just extra production, whether, and the same goes for a physical tank or a missile or a plane.
Yeah.
And it's not actually needed for defense, it's a net loss of whatever labor it takes to do and make those things, because it's not like those soldiers would be unemployed elsewhere. I mean, they would find something else to do. And that money would also be circulated among local businesses. So instead of wasting the money on the on the soldiers or the planes or the tanks or whatever, missiles or whatever it is,
Sure.
you should just not do that. But he started with the example of the broken window, and it's known as classically as the broken window fallacy. And if you go on YouTube, you can find all kinds of
Sure.
video representations of it. It really gives a great explanation. But the basic idea is that, oh well, this sets in, if some kid breaks a window, it sets in motion all this commerce that creates more wealth.
Yeah.
The glass man, the glazier, he goes and gets a new window, and then he gets paid, and he goes to the next guy and he buys a new suit, and and all around, and everybody's wealthier. But they forget the fact that, well, the glazier could have done, made somebody else's window. I mean, we're down a window. I mean, that's the net, and that consideration is not made. So he talks about, one of his comments is the good economist sees not just that which is seen, but which is unseen. Like what else would have happened? Compared to what is my favorite line. Compared to what? Compared to nothing? Well, that's not what was going to happen.
Sure.
So, and Bastiat just makes a great explanation of it. There's all kinds of great video representation. I don't know, maybe the Cato Institute has one. But I'm sure that there's a number of free enterprise groups out there, and probably the Competitive Enterprise. They love to Competitive Enterprise Institute. They love to make videos of those kind of things. Great one of iPencil by the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, Leonard Reed. It's iPencil is. You ever heard of it?
I have heard of. I've heard of. Foundation of Economic Education. I had actually looked at quite a while back some of their articles, and I actually think it's pretty fascinating. And it's one of those things to where, I'm the type of person I have to go back and, reread something 2, 3, 4 times because I just don't get it all in one sitting. But I was introduced to them, I think, probably about 3 years ago, and I was like, wow, like how is this not out there more? It's like, this is some of the most important information I think that we could digest, honestly. I mean,
Leonard Reed, he put out this essay back in, it might have been the 50s, might have even been the 40s, but it was right at the time. It's called iPencil. It's a story of like, how does a pencil get made? Yeah. And there's tremendous 5-minute video representations of it online. But it's worth seeing.
Sure.
It was just one of the great free market essays of the 20th century, and the fee was great in theory for many years, and then I thought in the 90s they got really good. 90s and 2000s they started covering more contemporary subjects, and they got even better because they were sort of academic. I remember picking up. They had a bulletin or a journal that my undergrad, Stonehill College, used to subscribe to, and I was kind of bored by it. At the time, I probably wouldn't be these days because I'm more interested in economics. But it was a little bit more staid. But some of the stuff that they publish now is just topical. It's great, So
sure. Yeah, like I said, what little I have looked at from them, it always was pretty intriguing stuff, and a lot of it. I mean, to be fair, like a lot of the information tonight, you've shed a lot of light, not only I think for myself, but for the people that are watching, on different facets of the economy and how the economy works, how it functions, how the certain parts are integrated, and what works and kind of what doesn't work, and I always try to look at it from like, okay, well, there's no shame in not knowing something, or there's no shame in having, a disposition of like earlier, it's like I had a certain disposition, as I explained, about like inflation, and not realizing that there's this whole other perspective of inflation that is not only more accurate, but makes more sense in terms of how it works. And, I think the best thing that we can do is to not stop attempting to learn. And I think that's what FEE does really well, is they do put out things that are really easily digestible. The Libertarian Institute does that. The Ron Paul Institute does that. And so there's amazing resources. And, and that's why I'm so happy that you decided to come on tonight, because it's, you have brought, I think for some people, hearing it from somebody is also better than reading it sometimes. And so you've been able to do that. And there are a couple things also that, a couple questions or a couple comments that I would like to point towards you, if you're willing to
Sure.
respond to those. So one of them is by Centerline Systems. He's curious on the thoughts about Doge and excessive government spending.
Well, I agree. Government spends excessively.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think too.
Oh, you're not wrong.
I like the idea of Doge, and I've heard some interesting explanations about it. That they basically took an old Obama, an agency that was created under Obama, renamed it Doge, and then so it is technically a government agency, according to some people. I did not know that. But I think most of this is going to be undone, unfortunately. I think most of the cuts, I mean, some of the things the president can do on his own, because Congress writes laws very loosely to give the president the maximum amount of flexibility, not thinking he would cut, but thinking he would expand.
Yeah.
So, some of these leases on empty buildings that are being cut, those will stay. But I think, cuts in programs, those are determined by Congress, and there's a long-standing Supreme Court precedent saying you can't do that.
Sure.
Nixon tried that in 1973, I think, and it went to the Supreme Court, and in Train versus City of New York, they said, no, you can't hold back money that's appropriated by Congress. I think the current court will probably agree with that. So unfortunately, USAID will be back in business. Unfortunately, the Department of Education, which was created by Congress, will probably still be the Department of Education,
right?
Despite the disruptions, which I appreciate. I'm happy for. I mean, the more that can be disrupted, the better. But I think it is coming back unless Congress does something about it, which they probably will not, because we have a Congress that is a zombie Congress every bit as much as Biden was a zombie president 4 years ago. If you look at, I mean, I've been tracking this since after I got out of college the first time. I went to work for the John Birch Society, right-wing group, and I was doing their congressional analysis. I worked for the research department back in the 90s. So I've been covering Congress since the 90s. And back then, Congress used to vote on, actually the 80s, late 80s, Congress used to vote on all spending 3 times. They would first pass an overall budget, which, and different committees and groups would pass amendments, say, oh, the Congressional Black Caucus would say, no, let's spend an extra $100 billion or whatever it is, and have all these amendments, and they pass this budget, and it wouldn't technically spend the money, but it would say, Congress, we're going to spend this money. Once this goes between the House and Senate, then they would take this budget numbers and send them off to the committees, and the committees would pass what's called authorization bills, which also didn't have money. All right, but they would change the laws a little bit here and there, and they would put funding limits in them, and they would pass all of these 12, sometimes 13 bills, and then they would do the appropriations. They would basically, the authorization bills are basically, you're building the cup where the money's going to go, and then the appropriations bills would fill the cup with with the money. And then they would pass the 13 appropriations bills. So they would vote on it 3 times. They don't do that anymore. I mean, one of my favorite videos of the last couple of years is Thomas Massey talking about political theater. The budget process. I cannot listen to that enough, because that's what they do. They want people in Washington who are just going to go, take it and just vote for the omnibus bill. One
Right.
vote. If you don't vote for it, you vote for shutting down the government.
Yep.
I mean, they just want people who are there not to change anything, but who are there to pick up a check. And
Sure.
that's why you see more and more actors in politics. I mean, you see, or performers in politics. It's more actors, more sports heroes. It started with, in the 90s with Sonny Bono and Jim Bunning, who was a great baseball star. But now, you've got, I mean, all around the world, really. I mean, Donald Trump was a reality TV star. Vladimir Zelensky was a TV star, comedian.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go up and down. The former prime minister of Pakistan was a national cricket star.
Wow.
Imran Khan. I mean, it's just that it's full of celebrities. That's really what it is. Al Franken. I was putting together a list. I mean, and why? Because Congress is performative these days. It's not.
Yep.
It's not. These are not experts who pore over the details and look at, should we be spending this? They're not doing that. The deep state, and by deep state I mean the permanent executive branch employees who make policy outside of the elected branches.
Yes.
Okay. And some people say, I don't think there is a deep state. What are you talking about? So the evidence of the deep state is, so, I mean, there's tons of things, but take, for instance, James Clapper. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, he went up before Congress and says, oh, we're not collecting the records of Americans. Well, of course they were, but he was lying to Congress. Congress didn't know, right? I mean, there's tons of examples of that kind of thing, and it's been really going on since the 60s. I mean, the Church Committee hearings revealed that the intelligence agencies were making policy without the Nixon White House even knowing about it. It goes back that far, but I mean, it's done across the board. It's not just the intelligence agencies. It's the FDA and the EPA, and all of these agencies are making policy, even, not official policy where they put it in the congressional, the Federal Register, and the Code of Federal Regulations. But I mean, secretly, just, this is our policy, and that's the way they're doing it. And it's dangerous, and that's why they want people in Congress who will do nothing, who would just be check cashers and seat warmers, and that's it.
No, I totally agree with that, and I think the behavior has increasingly shown that, to a point to where they're not even hiding it anymore. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're just like, yeah, I mean, I show up at my job, I sit here, I participate, and then I go home, and it's as much as I would love to say, like, oh my gosh, like the absolute audacity of these people, the nerve of these people but it's like, in the end of the day, like, they know that we know, and they also know that, like, well, what are we going to do about it? And unfortunately, we're not quite to the point to where we're like, no, yeah, we're yanking you out of the game. All right. You're not going to be in the seats anymore. And you're not going to, I think that there's a lot that still needs to happen. I think education's a huge portion of it, that people need to kind of come and see, like, how bad things really are. And and we'll touch on this, before we wrap everything up, but you, if I remember correctly, I think you had touched on even like the media aspect at the very end of Scott Horton's show, and how that's, kind of evolved away from, that legacy and that kind of captured media to now we are getting a little bit more advantageous. We have media outlets that fortunately are able to show certain things, but I still think we also have, we still have some legacy media that's really trying to hold on to that and create this picture that they want you to see, as opposed to what we should be seeing. And I hope that starts to get fixed.
They're worried. I think they're worried right now because, I wrote a piece, it might have been a year ago now, called "We're Primed for a Spark," and basically what it is, their candidates aren't always winning. I mean, Donald Trump wasn't, he's 95% with them, but they really wanted that 5%. They wanted to get rid of Donald Trump. You look at Javier Milei; they didn't want him. Bolsonaro in Brazil, he won anyway. Before him, they didn't want Lula in Brazil.
Sure.
They're playing this game of like, well, we'll put the other guy in prison.
Yeah.
This trying to swap the prison cells. I mean, Lula went from the presidency to the prison, and then Bolsonaro went in charge. But the populists are winning on occasion, and they're afraid of that. And because we have these new media, and people are watching it. I mean, even though there's still what I call the captive media, the media that dutifully reports the talking points released by the Democrat and the Republican parties. If you listen to CNN or MSNBC, you hear the talking heads, and they all say exactly the same thing on the same day,
right?
The same way. You realize
it's creepy. It's weird.
It is creepy, and there's a lot of people on YouTube that make these great videos showing how creepy it is.
It's the worst.
The 2 screens, the 4 screens, the 16.
It's the worst. It's so bad.
Yeah, and it becomes more and more obvious. That kind of thing. That's why most of the. I mean, let's face it. The people still watching. The legacy national news. Yeah, it's mostly retired older people. Those are the ones. I mean, there's a handful of leftists that are dutifully hanging on to MSNBC, but most people have canceled their subscriptions to those things. I mean, like I canceled my cable TV subscription last year, and I held on to it for a long time because I was taking care of my elderly mother-in-law, and she, I didn't want to teach her how to change the channels, more dynamically. So, but once she was gone, the TV was gone. I mean, I don't need to watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox. I don't need to watch any of them. And a lot of people are that way. They don't, they might like some of the programming, but they don't watch the news. They get their news in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if it is actually on in a household, from what I've found is it's more of like a routine. It's, they're not really sitting there watching it. It's just the pervasive background noise. And I get the sense that it's like, okay, well, it's just what we do. You turn it on, and it's something that I think has gone through generations, because there's certain, you turn on the radio, and the radio is the background noise. And then as things start to evolve, you have the TVs, and then you turn the TV on as background noise to some degree. And so I think that's kind of what the news is, at least the legacy media has become, is like, it's just background noise. And I mean, thank goodness for that. I'm so happy that they're relegated even just to background noise. It's like, and it took so long for it to get to that point. So there's one more comment that I'd love to bring up to you, and then we'll start to wrap it up here, because I would like to end on a positive note. So we'll get to this comment first. It is regarding tariffs, and it's basically, don't tariffs compel business to move industry back to the host country? Isn't that something that would get, those companies to be like, you know what? Yeah, we're going to go back and we're going to be a part of our country, and instead of outsourcing somewhere else. So.
Yeah, the simple answer to that is no, tariffs do not do that. And this was yet another essay I had my students read. There was this, I want to say it was about 1819, and he was a Portuguese Jewish economist. I'm trying to think of his name, but he what he did was he talked about the theory of comparative advantage. In other words, it doesn't make any sense for us to say, put a premium on, well, let's make sure America is self-sufficient in pineapple production. I mean, there are places you can grow pineapples in America. I mean, Hawaii is one. But, I mean, we're a net pineapple importer, right? I mean, like, you could probably grow them in Southern California. You could probably grow them in parts of Texas and Florida. but it's probably if the price mechanism shows that we're importing them, it means that American labor is better allocated to doing something else that would make it more efficient. And shoot, it's really bothering me that I can't think of his name. Again, I'll think of it when I'm done. But he uses the example. Now he's a guy. He was shoot. All right. But anyway, he uses the example of port wine and oh man, I can't even think of the other thing. The production of port wine, and I forget what it is, wool clothes. I forget what the other even thing was. But he talks about how even even if you're less efficient than the more productive country, it's best for you to do what you're most efficient at. Yeah. And it's best for the host country to do what they're most efficient at because they get the wealthiest. Sure. Because of international trade. And it really bothers me that I can't think of the guy's name. Oh man. All right, I'm gonna just open up a breath. Yeah, it just bothers me.
I hate it when that happens. I'll be in the middle of a conversation. I'm almost to the point of inflection. And then it's like all of a sudden, boom, it's gone. And it's like, dude, I know exactly what I'm talking about. So
yeah, no, I mean, it's Chris. Let me see. Oh man, I'm going to think of it as soon as this show is over.
Oh, of course. Yep.
Yeah.
That's how it always works.
Yeah, but he put it in a book in 1819. I took a clip of it from a clip from it because it was again a very concise, well done explanation of why it doesn't make sense to be. It's called autarky, that the system where you're totally self-reliant, where you just shut out businesses that, or at least things that you could produce yourself, and it raises prices for the domestic market more than it otherwise would for consumers, and on net they're worse off. And David Ricardo, I just thought of it. Okay. And it's his theory of competitive advantage. And, obviously you can't do it for some things like, we can't be self-sufficient in diamond production because all the diamonds come from South Africa and Namibia and, Africa. Mm-hmm. We can't, there's certain things we can't be self-sufficient.
Right.
But even the things that we could easily produce ourselves, if some other country could do it, even if they do it less efficiently there, it's better to just let the price mechanism decide. That's what Ricardo showed. Sure. And I'm going to go with that. There's one caveat though, and it's not an economic caveat. And I've often used this. I mean, I think it's not a practical application, but I want to give you it at least in theory.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, imagine like in especially subsidies. There was an idea that back in the 80s, now maybe it's China, that they're subsidizing all the heavy industry and they're going to have all the heavy industry, and we're thinking, well, we'd be better off. But let's say Japan were to do that. Let's say Japan were to say, we're going to subsidize all our cars so that every American can buy a car for $1.
Yep.
And we're going to subsidize all our airplanes so that every American could buy their own airplane for $2. And we're going to subsidize all our boats, all our ships, even giant steamers and stuff.
Yeah.
So that every American could buy a giant boat for $3. Who'd be better off? Well, we would, right? We would be much better off because we could have a big boat and we could have an airplane and we could have a car for almost nothing.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
That's on December 6th, 1941. What about December 7th? We have no industry. In theory. Yeah. I'm just saying that in theory. I mean, I don't think China is that big that they could take out our industry with subsidies. I'm not saying, but I just throw that out as a theoretical possibility.
Sure. Yeah.
It's something to think about. I mean, if you're a small economy, you're not going to be militarily independent anyway. The United States is a huge economy. I mean, after World War II, we were almost half of world GDP. I think we were 45%.
Right. Yep.
Of the value of everything built in the world was made in the United States. Now it's about 17%. It's a lot smaller, but we're still by far the biggest economy in the world.
Yeah.
So, we have the ability to be self-sufficient enough in military equipment where we don't have to worry about that. But in theory, theoretically you could do it, but that's not an economic argument. That's a political argument.
Right. And, but I also think that it's actually not only intriguing, but it's kind of an important argument, I would say, because it's, even though it's not economic, I mean, there's some substance there that I think is worth stepping back and actually taking a look at, so I still think it fits perfect because it's something I hadn't even considered until you brought it up. So I'm happy you did.
Yeah. I mean, look, we have tremendous amount of industry in the United States. We have all these alliances anyway. And we have a huge military industrial complex. So we're not really in danger of not being able to maintain our military independence.
Sure.
Military. But I mean, in theory, you could make that argument, especially for if China and India were to get much bigger and they were just subsidized and they had an alliance. I mean, it would have to be, but they'd have to be much, much bigger than we are presently.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, I think that was a good rounding off of the last few questions / comments that we had. And now, before we come to our conclusion, is there light at the end of the tunnel, Tom, or are we just riding a train to nowhere and it's only getting darker?
Well, it's getting darker, but I mean, that's we're in the tunnel, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. The question is when.
Sure.
I did, as I mentioned earlier, I wrote a piece called "We're Primed for a Spark." I think we're just waiting for that tentpole candidate. I'm a member of the Libertarian Party. I don't think it's going to come from the Republican Party, but let's face it, Trump was able to run a third-party candidacy within the Republican Party. I don't know if that'll be allowed again when he's gone, which is 3.5 years. But if not, it'll be the Libertarian Party or some other party that comes up with this candidate, because there's a case to be made. Like the Democrats literally offer the vast majority of voters nothing, and the Republicans say, we'll give you a tip of $500 every year, and that's it. I mean, they will take $15,000 from you and we'll give you $500 back. And that's not enough. I mean, that's
right.
That's why Javier Milei won, also because the inflation was really bad, but the system was broken, and I think the system's broken in America. The middle class has been stagnant in ways that was never the case before the collapse of the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1971. So the people are fed up, and they just need the right person to bring the message. I'm not that right person, by the way. I'm not running. I am going to run for Libertarian National Committee in 2026, but I'm not. Yeah, I'm not going to run for political office. Yeah. I'd rather just be a gadfly around the margins and complain. So.
Well, fair enough. I mean, it's I don't have any plans for running for anything, at least not presently. But if I do, I should only be so fortunate to have a good support network and to make my way in the area that I belong. So Tom, I really appreciate you coming on. You're a wealth of knowledge. You've shared a lot. There's a lot of things that, just even from my questions and from the viewers' questions that I think we all kind of learned here tonight. And because, like Centerline Systems in the comments said, you don't know what you don't know. And, and if you're not asking questions, if you're not, even if, you're coming in with this idea of, maybe you're not looking at it in the right way, or maybe you're not remembering something the right way. If you're not asking those questions, how are you going to even get any closer to the truth? And I think you've brought a lot of insight and a lot of perspective to the realm of economics, to the many facets that economics touches. And, especially as it pertains to inflation, the tariffs was a huge thing, taxation, and so many other things that we covered. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here. It means a lot, not only to me, but to the people that come across this. So, and I hate to put you on the spot, but if you'd be willing to come back again, I would certainly love to have you back, because I also had read another article that you did pertaining to fascism, which I thought was very, very interesting. And that's a subject that I would love to dig into further. So
yeah, you're very kind, and yes, yeah, I'd be willing to do that. I've got a few pieces coming up about. I kind of
Perfect.
alluded to them. I've got a few pieces that coming up about the zombie Congress and how the Democrats made Elon Musk a billionaire. So I mean, and there's what else did I? And there's a media piece I think that they're going to publish next week. So
okay,
they do one a week, not every week, but
sure.
when I get them written. So
Awesome.
I've got a good string of them coming up. So it'll
Awesome.
be fun. Yeah. But,
Yeah. No, I absolutely look forward to it, and yeah, we will definitely stay in contact, and we'll hopefully be able to get something lined up when it makes sense for both of our schedules. And because yeah, I have to say, when I read that article you did on fascism, there was something that I even, there are a number of things that I even was not aware of, and I was like, wow, yeah, I'm starting to see it. I'm starting to kind of connect the dots to a lot of the points that you made, and I don't want to spoil it because it was really good, but I will 100% in the description. I will put a couple of your articles, especially as they pertain to this conversation. And I think you do a really good job of putting your points across. Are you primarily found at the Libertarian Institute, or are there other areas that people can find you as well?
Yeah, mostly there. I do some blogging for the Massachusetts Libertarian Party, lpoma.org. I have a personal blog, but it's not. I would say the majority is not politics. It's well, maybe it's probably about half politics and half faith.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Sure.
And then yeah, that's about it. I mean,
Perfect.
there's an odd article here that I sent to the Ron Paul Institute or
Sure.
some other place. I've been different places, but yeah, mainly it's the Libertarian Institute.
Awesome.
Love Scott Horton. He's a great guy.
Yeah. I love he definitely has a way about him, especially in how he conducts his show. He's a very he at least keeps me intrigued the entire way through. And I actually I'm working my way through his book, Provoked, and I have to say it's a phenomenal book. I'm really, really enjoying it. So that being said, if you're willing to stick around for a minute after the show ends, I'd love to talk to you for a couple minutes after.
Yeah, I'll do that.
But yeah, thank you very much, Tom, for coming on. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope everybody got something out of all the information that you provided tonight. And, with that being said, I guess my ending comment is, it's liberty takes all of us, and it requires education. It requires being involved. It requires getting out there and doing things that don't necessarily, that aren't necessarily the easiest or the most comfortable, but, we have to get involved, and definitely at a local level, get involved in your states, however it is that you can, because that's where you can really start to make the most impact. So thank you very much to everybody that came out and watched the podcast tonight. Thank you again, Tom. And we will see everybody next Saturday, the same time at 5 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and I will be providing an update as to what the topic of conversation will be for next week, shortly here in the next day or two. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you all next Saturday. Take care. God bless.